Hey guys, this is Devin here with Hillbilly Networks. Today I'm going to show you how to read a light meter. On my desk here I have two different brand light meters. One is a Viavi, that's an expensive light meter. It's a well-known industry brand such as an Expo. That's the same brand as our OTDR. I also have an Amazon special here, which I will post a link to this in there. I would recommend getting one of these. Um, to me, there's almost no point in getting a $300 to $500 meter other than if your company just has a lot of money to spend and they invest in high quality tools. That's going to be the case for a lot of big telecommunications and power companies. But when I'm buying stuff, we've got an Amazon account through my work. I'm just going to grab a cheap light meter, cheap VFL, whatever I need, even a live fiber detector. I get those off of Amazon. We've got expensive ones, we've got the cheap ones. I use the cheap ones most of the time. They actually tend to work better, believe it or not. You get stronger light on cheap VFLs. You get more options usually. The light meter might do light meter as well as VFL, which this one does. It even has an RJ45 tester on the bottom of it. And again, it was probably 20 or 30 bucks off of Amazon. But I'm gonna go ahead and get to it. I'm gonna show you how to look at those, how to operate them, and what is a good light level and what is a bad light level, and why you can't just simply go by a general good and bad. It's more complicated than that, unfortunately. A lot of times you'll have installers that were trained by somebody and they were trained focused on a specific line of equipment. So they've got in their head that, the light level is good if it's from here to here, no matter what, when that's actually dependent upon the type of equipment you're using. All right, so here we have VFL. It's got a cap here to open and close it. And there you have your port where you're going to plug your jumper into to check your light levels. The Amazon one, same deal. It's got a cover, but you'll see it actually has two. That's because one, if you look really closely, says VFL and the other one says OPM. You want to use the one that says OPM. That is optical power meter is what that stands for. VFL, visual fault locator. So first thing you're going to do is turn these on. The Viavi, you'll see it says low. That actually means no light. If I open it up, you're going to start seeing some numbers just from the light here in my garage. So the takeaway from that is low is nothing or almost nothing. Because a lot of times, some of these will read out different whenever it's low. For example, this one says -70. That means no light on this one. The Viavi, I will say one thing it does is it auto hones in on the wavelength. So if it's 1550, 1310, 850, something else like that, 1625, whatever it may be, it's going to auto hone into that, versus this one, you actually have to manually change the wavelength on it. But that being said, that's not actually that important. Maybe in a build situation where you're actually building fiber optic lines and you're testing, because usually whenever you're working on a contract and you're building a long line, you're going to have to test that bidirectionally with OTDRs, and you're also going to have to do a light source and a power meter test on it. That's going to give you your true loss. An OTDR does not give you true loss, it gives you estimates, because it's just running light past the splice, sending it back to you, telling you how much it thinks the loss is. It's very accurate, but it's not 100%. If you go to any large fiber optic classes, which the hat I'm wearing right now, that company, if you're looking for a company to go do fiber optics courses with, Light Brigade would be the one I would recommend. They are expensive, you know, they can be thousands of dollars for the courses, but they are very reputable. They've been around for a long time. That's what a lot of different companies will use to train their employees if they want to send them to a very good fiber optic course. They have fiber to the home, fiber to the business, they have fiber optic installers, they have outside plant engineering classes. I mean, almost everything you can think of in terms of that. Another company I will say, which you've seen on my page, I've got a Big C RCDD. They do have fiber optic classes as well. But again, my recommendation would be Light Brigade would be the one to go with if you're wanting to learn specifically about fiber optics. I have 2 certifications through them. When you take it through that company, your certification actually comes through an association called Electronic Technicians Association. So one of my certifications is ETA FOI, fiber optic installer. The other one's ETA FOSP, fiber optic, I think fiber outside plant is what that one stands for, if I remember correctly. But the FOSP is actually for FTTH. So don't get hung up on the acronyms. The course was actually FTTH, fiber to the home, but the certification says FOSP. Anyways, so I'm gonna focus on the Amazon one because that's the one, again, I would recommend you buy if you're gonna buy one with your own money. I would not recommend spending hundreds of dollars on a light meter. They're very simple as far as how they function. So there's almost no reason to do that if it's your own money. So let's say, and we're going to pretend, because I do not have a light source with me today. My OTDR has one, but it is unfortunately on its way to the repair facility because it's having issues. It's a VIV. It's a very, very good OTDR, but we've had it for a while. It's been used a lot and it is ready to be repaired. So I would take this jumper, which this one right here is an SCAPC. That stands for Subscriber Connector Angled Polish Connector. And that green is indicative of APC, Angled Polish Connector. Blue, on the other end, would be UPC, Ultra Polish Connector, which is actually flat on the top instead of angled, but it's the same size. It's still an SC, but it's an SC-UPC, SC-APC. There's various other types. There's LC-UPC. They even make an LC-APC now. We don't have any in any of our equipment, but I know of another power company that does a lot of fiber. A lot of their connectors are LC-APC. One of the reasons you would use LC is for density. You can fill a lot more connections, cross connects, patch panels in a small place with these. These take up a lot more room when you're actually looking at the patch panel itself. So I'm going to take this angled connector here and I'm going to plug it into the OPM slot. And you'll feel once it's seated down all the way. When you plug that in, you're going to get a light level reading if the fiber is good from the source. So let's say it says -10. So the first thing I'm going to look at, if I don't know anything about the equipment on either end and I'm completely blind to it, it's new to me, is I need to figure out, okay, this piece of equipment that I just unplugged to plug this jumper into my meter, what light level does it require to function? So let's say, for example, it requires better than -27 dBm. If that's the case, then you would say, well, that's good, it's -10. Here's the thing though, certain pieces of equipment also have what's called a light level that's too strong. So let's say if it's stronger than -12, well, it may not work. It might, it still might work. I have seen where it works even when it's lower than what the threshold says on the documentation. which any piece of equipment you're working with, whether it's an SFP, which I'll go over that here in a minute, or it's an ONT, OLT, you'll be able to pull up a data sheet on that and it will tell you the max loss and what's too much. So in this case, -10 may have been too much. But another piece of equipment, -10 may be fine. Now, a lot of people, when they're doing installs, they're trained by somebody else. If they're just an installer, they're trained by somebody else. And that person will generally tell them based off the equipment they are working with. So let's say this installer works with Calyx. They're going to be trained based off of the type of ONTs they use and what's a good light level for those. So sometimes you'll hear installers say, well, -15, that's good. That's great. You don't have any problems. Maybe. I will say in most cases, they're probably right. Because from what I've seen with various pieces of equipment, between switches with SFPs, ONTs, old NIDs that were active Ethernet, most of them, if it's under -27, it usually works pretty good. So that is a, you could say -9 to -27. It's a pretty good general rule of thumb, but again, it's best to look at the equipment itself, because you could spend all day troubleshooting something and have what you think is a good light level, but it's actually too strong. And then in that case, you're going to need to use something called an attenuator. You can actually make attenuators. I'm going to use this one since this is a piece of cut fiber that's no good anymore. It is for testing though. In fiber optics classes, they'll actually teach you how to make a field attenuator. Let's see if I can find a pencil. There we go. If you actually take the fiber itself and you had this plugged into a light source, the other end's plugged into a power meter, and you're taking the middle of the cable here, you can wrap it around a pencil or a pin like that. And as you do more and more wraps, you're going to see that light level drop. And if you had to temporarily get a customer out that way, you can actually tape this to the pencil and shove it inside the box and come back and put an actual attenuator on it later. Because wouldn't want to leave it like that, just because that's shoddy work, but it would be a good temp fix. All right, so now that you know you have a potentially too strong level of light versus one that's not strong enough, and both can cause you issues, the other thing I want to get into is not just ONTs and OLTs, which you deal with on fiber to the home and fiber to the business, which, by the way, OLT is optical line terminal and ONT is optical network terminal. That's what those stand for. So on a switch, one that I've worked with a lot due to school systems around where I am is an extreme switch. That's the brand of the switch, they're purple. A lot of times the schools will have SFPs, which are little modules, about the size of a USB drive. They will slide into a port on the switch called an SFP slot, and you plug in your SFP, which is, I believe that stands for small form pluggable, if I remember correctly. You would plug that in there, and then now you have made that switch to where you can plug a fiber jumper into it instead of a Cat 6 connector. Not all switches have this. It's usually more expensive to get a switch that has SFP slots or existing fiber connectors on it. But specifically with the extreme ones, if there is no light and there is damage to the fiber, if a network technician logs into the switch, they actually will see the switch itself given a reading of -38. Not sure why Extreme coded their switches to state that when there is no light, but -38 for an Extreme switch is no light. That's why it's good to have a power meter. I've actually left these with school network administrators before so that they can actually plug in and check it themselves, because after a handful of times, discovered that -38 meant nothing. Like -70 means nothing on this one, but that's a much lower number, because -38, That's getting into a range where you could have a fiber that has light on it, but there's some really, really bad splices or some really bad bends somewhere, whether it be macro or micro, something could be going on. So I don't like that they specifically listed negative 38 for that. But on those switches, those SFPs, those are actually rated for a distance. So the SFPs in some cases will say on the module itself 20 km, 40 km, or 80 km. That's telling you how far it's rated for. The light is made to be strong enough for that. It'll also tell you the wavelength on there in many cases, but unfortunately sometimes it won't tell you hardly any of that. It may tell you an acronym like LR, SR, ER, XR. I think I've seen all those on them, and those are kind of indicative of what the distance is, but unless you work with that specific brand a lot, I can tell you I do not have memorized. I don't have memorized what those mean. So I would have to actually take the part number, Google it, pull up the data sheet, and then I would be able to tell, well, that's an 80 km optic. So let's say the optic itself, you know, is an 80 km optic. The distance it's traveling is within 80 kilometers. You also don't want to be using an 80 km optic on a 20 kilometer circuit because that's going to be too strong. And that's going to cause issues on the receiving end, which if it's a bi-die, it's going to cause issues with both of them. Either way, it's going to cause issues with both of them potentially because it's overpowering the eye on the other end. But let's say you have it rated for the right distance, but you're not getting a good light level on the other end, or so you think. You're not. What you're going to do is pull up the data sheet for that at that point, and then you'll be able to tell, hey, this SFP is supposed to have greater than negative 10 dB, but no less than negative 27, as we said earlier. If your light level is negative 33, well, yeah, you've got some bad splices somewhere. You've got potentially some damage, some bends. There's a lot of different reasons for that. But at that point, you're going to have to start looking at the fiber. But before you do that, you want to go look at the source end and make sure that that optic itself is actually putting out what it's supposed to put out, because sometimes they weaken over time. So you would want to go to the other end of the circuit, put your light meter directly to that optic, and let's say it says positive 2 dB. Well, you can look at the data sheet and see it's supposed to be putting out, you know, positive 5. Well, you got a problem there more than likely. So first thing you're going to want to do is switch that optic and put one that actually matches what the data sheet says. Go back to the other end, check it, and boom, you'll probably have a good light level in that case. But as a general basis, you want to look at the data sheets for things to tell what the light level is. Now, if you've worked with a piece of equipment a lot, like I work with ad trend ONTs a lot, I know generally speaking what they require. But if you threw me out there and I'm working with some random switch with random SFPs that I know nothing about, when I see a number, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me. I can make some assumptions based off of the number it is and say, well, this is probably good, but I could be wrong. So just be aware that a lot of times in the fiber optic world, especially installers, there can be miscommunications by trainers telling them these are good light levels and not telling them these are good light levels for this equipment. So they get this idea that that's good for everything. So that's how you read a light meter. You're looking at what's too strong, what's too little. And again, if I didn't say it already, that's my first go-to whenever I go to an outage. I'm gonna go to the business or the home that's down. I'm gonna walk in there with a light meter in my hand and a one click so I can clean the connector before and after, and I'm gonna check it with my meter. If my meter actually shows that I have good light levels and I know the equipment, I'm gonna try to reseat that connector because they do vibrate out sometimes over time if somebody didn't seat it in there good in the beginning. You can also have a faulty connector that just won't click in there right. But that's my go-to, is to use the light meter first. If I get good light levels, then more than likely it's the equipment on site. If I'm not getting any light, I'm getting my OTDR from my truck and I am shooting the fiber to see where the damage is or the break, or if it's making it all the way back to the supply, which in our case, we use a GPON system, which is a passive optical network, and that's sending light to multiple customers from one SFP inside of a switch at the NOC, or the CO as many people call it, and we would have 32 customers down in that case, or 64 depending on the split. So if I've got a splitter and everybody's up but this one and I've got no light here, well, more than likely when I hook that OTDR up, I'm gonna see that it's stopping somewhere. But that's how you read a light meter. I will post some pictures in this video of some different light levels since I don't have a source to actually show you the digital readout. I have pictures of both of these of reads that I've gotten in the field from hooking up to different things. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm gonna start trying to do more videos on more things. One of the things is I'm gonna do a video on trying to splice in a small box like this for like a fiber to the home case. I'm going to do a video on my splicer itself, the different parts of it. I've got different cleaners over here. I've got VFLs. I've got some Milwaukee tools. Milwaukee came out with some new splice tools in the recent year. We got them pre-ordered and I love them. They're great. Not just because they're Milwaukee. I will say the strippers, I had some issues with them, but now they're working great. They also have a drop stripper as well. I don't have that set in here, but that thing works great. It's amazing. But anyways, thanks guys.